Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun just announced his resignation. Hold on guys, is that today's topic? It was the 1973 oil crisis and Airbus was in shambles. Europe was in a recession and Airbus's first wide-body aircraft, the A300, wasn't selling. Only 25 aircraft were sold after a world tour of the aircraft. And there was a lot of fear in the air. Airbus was losing hope as this was the first pan-European project, which was just about to become a failure. In such times of despair though, Airbus was so desperate that it loaned out 4 A300 aircraft for free for 6 months. Eastern Airlines, the 4th biggest airline in the United States at the time, took up this offer. In the end, Eastern loved the aircraft and ordered 25 A300s valued at $778 million in 1974. This was only the beginning of something even bigger though. Airbus would go toe-to-toe with Boeing in the US with 40% market share 40 years later. From opening training centers to production lines for A320 aircraft in Alabama, it's literally as if Airbus is taking over its competitor's home market. Boeing's presence in Europe can't even be compared to Airbus's presence in the United States, not even in Asia, where Airbus has another production plant, similar to the one in Alabama. How did this come to be though? Who shaped this? Airbus decided to go American, hiring an American who would go to that level with exponential growth. That man is John Leahy. He literally put Boeing on their knees. As I was researching this topic, I just couldn't believe how much Boeing was distracted with Airbus and didn't actually focus on its own problems at the time. Before we delve in further, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsors enable us to uncover the intricacies of aviation, bringing to light stories that shape our skies. A heartfelt thank you to AnyMile.io for fueling today's exploration. Enter AnyMile, the pioneering end-to-end drone-based logistics platform. I was privileged to witness its transformative impact firsthand during a visit to Ecuador's capital city, Quito, where I met with Aeroloop, a drone manufacturer and operator in the city, and one of AnyMile's esteemed clients. It was a profound experience to see this integrated platform in action. AnyMile isn't just a platform. It's a beacon of innovation in mid-mile and last-mile deliveries, which is a revolution that's happening today, right now. It effortlessly connects transportation, shipment, fleet, and services management alongside unmanned traffic management systems, ground infrastructure, and drones, all within a unified ecosystem. Yet, what resonated most deeply was the tangible difference it made in the lives of people within these communities. AnyMile isn't merely about shaping the future. It's about empowering individuals and transforming livelihoods. It's about equipping companies, operators, and service providers with the tools to accelerate and scale their operations profitably. No more fragmented processes, no more wasted resources. With AnyMile, efficiency, sustainability, and profitability converge seamlessly. Join the vanguard of drone logistics. Embrace AnyMile, where the future of delivery is not a distant dream, but a present reality. Check out AnyMile at the link below if you're a shipper, a drone manufacturer, a drone operator, or an ancillary service. And now, let's continue our journey as we dive into Leahy's captivating story.
He was a transformational salesperson.
Can you imagine a New York taxi driver becoming a leading Airbus executive? That's exactly how Leahy started out. You know, oh boy, how am I going to tell my Uber driver that he could become the next CEO of Boeing? You know? To understand how John became a leader, though, I had to go to the greatest published work about John of his time. That was the book Air Wars. It was written by Leahy's good friend, Scott Hamilton. Leahy on the picture. This is the only published work that has him, on the front of the book.
I was always looking for some extra money to pay my way through, Leahy recalled. I had scholarships, loans, and student work, study programs. I was running the campus center. In the summer, when I was off from school, I had gotten a job driving a checkered cab. I started about 4 in the afternoon from JFK, waiting in the taxi line to get a fare, hopefully in Manhattan. I'd cruise up and down the east side, picking people up from bars and taking them to a nice restaurant. After, I'd go to LaGuardia, pick some fares there, come back into the city, and end around midnight, said Leahy.
Originally a student at Columbia University, he completed his MBA at Syracuse University, where his aviation career began, flying propeller aircraft at night.
I was able to build nighttime in my logbook, multi-engine time, IFR time in icing conditions. Almost every night we were filing IFR. The weather was usually horrendous.
Airbus's turning point was in 1994 though, when
The Airbus executive board initially laughed at him, Leahy recalled. I said we need to be in band 40% to 60%. I remember going to the executive board meeting, which was the CEOs of the manufacturers that owned us. They listened to my presentation in January 1995 and why this was so important.
as a half European, that was exactly the reaction I was expecting from those Airbus officials. Still, he persisted with his goal, just like Charles Lindbergh did, amidst all risks.
They said that sounds very motivating for your sales team, but we want to know what is the real and realistic goal for market share that we should be aiming for. I paused, and I said 50. Said Leahy, that's what we need to do. They started laughing. Somebody said, you can't be serious. 25%, maybe 30% would be a more reasonable, more sustainable target, said Leahy.
Leahy and his rather aggressive and well accomplished tactics in the 90s helped make that boost.
Richard Aboulafia is a managing director of AeroDynamic Advisory, a boutique aerospace management consulting firm.
Ultimately, this was Airbus's strong point that brought about this change. Scott and other experts in the industry put government subsidies and Boeing increasing production too much as the reason for why the balance changed. The government subsidies came from European countries that had Airbus production plants, and Boeing selling more aircraft at cheaper rates to compete with Airbus, causing them to increase production. Doesn't tell the full story of this crucial turning point though.
Boeing itself, its market share remained shockingly constant through all of this. You know, the numbers speak very eloquently. Basically, it was, 50-something percent or 60-something percent at the start of the, 90s and something like that around 2000. It wasn't all that different.
What was it really then?
I thought that I'd be heavily criticized, but they wanted to know what was happening in the market. What was Boeing doing in their pricing strategies against us? Everybody seemed quite comfortable that this was a long-term strategy, said Leahy.
There are two things I would say that you can already get a sensation about how Leahy as a person is. First thing, he was very goal-oriented. And second thing was that he learned the art of patience. The second thing is something that Airbus taught him. As in Europe, a lot of companies are focused much more on the long-term exponential growth rather than short-term intensive growth. As his colleagues were trying to focus on long-term goals. By having Leahy's goal-oriented mind, he ultimately was able to build and make Airbus successful in the way that it is today. As you can see, Airbus's European leadership was willing to take its time to meet its goals.
In the negotiations, Airbus gave John significant authority. He was able to say yep or no, frequently on the spot, but always within a very short window of time.
Bill Franke is an airline investor and a co-founder and managing partner of Indigo Partners, LLC, a private equity fund which owns stakes in Frontier Airlines, Wizz Air, and JetSmart Airlines.
Boeing has been historically more traditional in its transaction management, was considerably more methodical in its negotiations, and thus disadvantaged by John's ability to make decisions at the moment.
The turning point was selling JetBlue, honestly.
David Neelman is the founder of JetBlue Airways and Azul Brazilian Airlines, and today runs Breeze Airways.
I think Northwest had some planes at the time. I'm not even sure if Delta had them. It was a very small market share, and I think getting JetBlue was really a big turning point for John in the U.S. market.
What was so important about these relationships though? to ensure a win-win for Airbus and its clients?
Well, obviously, walk-away rights. That was something that had been done before, but he used them, to a greater extent. To a certain extent, he had the good fortune to be from a company that wasn't overly obsessed with its balance sheet, so you could, have these sorts of guarantees, residual value guarantees on the Airbus balance sheet. No one really cared very much back home. It wasn't as profitability driven as it is today, and certainly not as profitability driven as Boeing has been. So he did have that luxury, and he was very effective with it. But I think a lot of it came down to personality. You meet salespeople over the years, and I've been in the business 35 years. John Leahy's personality really stood out. Obviously, it's not for everybody. For those who like him, I certainly thought he was pretty cool. He stood out as somebody you'd like to do business with.
And John would meet pretty much anywhere. Over the years, we met variously in Toulouse and London, Paris, Dubai, New York, and of course, here in Phoenix. I can't imagine his travel schedule, but he never batted an eye at a meeting, regardless of the location, if it was convenient to the customer.
Through John's selling and tenaciousness, I became convinced it was a much better airplane. And that was a pivotal moment for Airbus in the low-cost business, because so many have followed behind a JetBlue. Now, they probably would have at some point in time, but I take a lot of credit for that, and I'm proud of that.
But understanding who Leahy is as a person is not the full story. It also was the incredible aircraft that Airbus had on offer at the time.
I was really close to just doing a handshake with Boeing and being done, but I decided to go take a look at Airbus and what they had. I knew nothing about it. And as I learned about the airplane, as I learned, fly-by-wire, the wider cabin, more fuel efficient, newer technology, I just became convinced. And, Boeing had created this narrative that low-fare carriers couldn't fly the 320. It wasn't a low-fare, it was a U8, an LCC, a low-cost carrier airplane. And, through John's selling and tenaciousness, I became convinced it was a much better.
And he was prepared to stay and talk for as long as it took. Our negotiations always moved along briskly. I knew what I wanted. He knew I could add and subtract. And the discussions were, as a result, generally without a lot of self-serving commentary by him or by me.
Behind the scenes, though, at this turning point in the 90s, because of Boeing's increased production to compete with Airbus, it did lead to Boeing having a record year in profits. But at the same time, it led to a 2-year delay in aircraft deliveries. Not only that, but Airbus, only a couple of years later, in the early 2000s, introduced this Neo aircraft, which was a game changer for Airbus and came up as a surprise for Boeing. What this really goes to show is,
while Boeing tended to rotate its chief salesman every few years, Airbus's super salesman reported to 7 CEOs during his 23 years in Toulouse as commercial director of Airbus: Jean Pierson, Noel Forgeard, Gustav Humbert, Christian Streif, Louis Gallois, Thomas Enders, and Fabrice Breger. In all, Leahy spent 33 years at Airbus, said Scott Hamilton, author of Air Wars.
having a vision is important as well as not giving into the drama of the moment brought about by your competitor. The same can be said, for example, when it comes to buying stocks. Don't follow the emotion of the moment. Juan Trippe, founder of Pan Am, realized what it meant to have deep relationships with clients and competitors when it comes to building something, such as he did when he built Pan Am. And John built up Airbus's market share all over the world. Airbus, in the same way, is where it is today because of its people, its engineering, and its truth that it is looking to accomplish in the long term. No short-term gratifications and goals, but instead the very true meaning of quality, to always improve and to continue building on its story. That is what John Leahy did for Airbus.